One of my favorite inspirational quotes is from a hockey player named Wayne Gretzky, who said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." And that can apply to a lot of things in life, but I think it applies well to fish keeping because it's really important that you're okay with facing failure when keeping fish. Nobody is going to keep fish without making mistakes, and it's important that rather than getting concerned with avoiding them at all costs, you need to make sure that you learn from them and adjust as you go so that you don't make the same mistakes over and over again. The only way you're going to achieve success is if you're willing to run the risk of failing and really just act with confidence. And when something doesn't go right, find a change to make that will allow it to go right in the future. Now, I'm going to share with you some of my biggest failures keeping fish, what I learned from them, and some various failures that I think a lot of fish keepers make that if you can avoid them, you'll have a lot more success and a lot less headaches relating to killing fish and just a lot of other issues that can pop up very commonly for everyone in the hobby. Now, one of the biggest issues that I faced early on keeping fish was when I got my first big aquarium. I got a 55-gallon aquarium a couple years into keeping fish after keeping a 10-gallon for many years. And I got really excited. It seemed like a massive upgrade, which a 55 compared to a 10-gallon is a huge change. And as a lot of people do, when I got a new tank, I quickly added a bunch of fish. I added like 25 neon tetras, a bunch of rasboras, Cory catfish. I can't remember everything, but inevitably what happened when introducing all these fish super quickly was I ran into a disease outbreak. Ick took over the tank. The neon tetras were covered in it. It looked like you had shaken salt all over their bodies. And as a fairly new fish keeper, I didn't really know how to deal with it. And I ended up losing 25 neon tetras overnight. And I can't remember all the fish in that tank, but the majority of the tank was wiped out by disease in basically a blink of an eye. Now, there are a couple things you can learn from that. There were a couple of different factors that I think contributed to that happening. Obviously, getting a lot of fish at one time isn't necessarily a good idea. It's also not a good idea to get fish without proper medications ready to treat them if a disease does pop up. Now I would always have Ick-X ready, which is a great medication for knocking out ick. It's also, I've found, important to try to get fish during the times of year when the weather conditions aren't really extreme. If you get fish in the dead of winter when it's really cold, they're going to get cold. Even if your pet store is close to your house, driving them home, they can get temperature shock and be more susceptible to disease. In addition to that, if it's too hot and you're transporting them, they can get lack of oxygen in the bag, and that can stress them out. And then those factors can be increased in intensity if you're shipping fish from further away. And there's also just more turnover in fish in the winter because most people are cooped up inside in the winter, especially in the northern United States where it's cold and there isn't a whole lot to do. So people get really excited about their fish tanks in the winter and buy a lot of fish, when in reality, buying them in the spring or summer months would likely lead to more success. I also learned with that 55-gallon tank that a 55-gallon tank is probably the worst tank size you can buy. Now, there are a couple reasons for that. One, a 55 is a really tall, narrow tank. It's only a foot in terms of depth from front to back. And I'm not sure exactly how tall it is, but it's much taller than it is wide. And if you want a tank that can hold a lot of fish, you want a shorter tank with greater front to back depth, like a 40 breeder. I believe a 40 breeder can actually hold more fish than a 55 because it has greater water surface area for gas exchange. A 55-gallon tank also has a cross brace in the middle, which makes catching and netting fish nearly impossible. If you're trying to catch something like a cardinal tetra or any type of fish that can swim fast, when you attack it from one side of the brace, it will just run to the other side. You'll have to pick up your net, put it on the other side of the tank, and basically the only way to catch your fish is by setting a minnow trap. So 55-gallon tanks are really just not a good tank size, especially if you're looking to breed fish or do anything where you're ever going to need to get them back out of the tank after you put them in. So I highly recommend that if you're going with an upgraded tank size, go for a 40 breeder, or if you are going to face the cross brace, which I believe 75-gallon tanks also have cross braces, at least the new ones do. But a 75 does have more depth, so it won't be as narrow a tank that limits you in how many fish you can stock. Moving on from there, I have faced issues that taught me that you always need a top or a lid on your aquarium. There's a really old video I posted when I was breeding tilapia of explaining how I was trying to catch one of my female tilapia that was holding eggs or holding babies, and she actually jumped out of the tank while I was trying to net her and spit all the babies on the floor. Luckily, the adult didn't die, but pretty much all the babies did. And that really just taught me that you need a secure lid on your aquarium, which the aquarium was partially covered, but it wasn't a complete lid. And it just shows that your fish jumping out on the floor and dying is one of the worst ways to lose a fish. You just really look at it as, oh, it was a healthy fish. It had the energy to jump out of the tank, but you didn't have a lid on, so it suffocated and died. I've had that happen a couple times with other fish, like swordtails. Swordtails are big jumpers, hatchet fish. Generally, if you watch informational videos on different fish, the video will explain if that fish is more of a jumper. But in general, I just think a lid on an aquarium is better no matter what, because I've seen plenty of different types of fish jump, and they also keep the temperature more regulated in the tank, prevent evaporation, and protect your light so it doesn't get any water on it. So really, I just think it's important that everyone keeps a lid on their aquarium, because there's an abundance of benefit and basically no detriment to including it. Another big failure I had that was probably avoidable if I was being more careful, but sometimes you get careless when you're too, I don't know, you get too comfortable that you know what you're doing keeping fish, and then you do something that you might have, I guess, an unforced error that you might not have done as a beginner. So I was changing water for my guppies last year, which I think I may have like one video of the adult guppies before this happened. But I changed the water without really monitoring the temperature of the water I was putting in, and without dechlorinating it, because I didn't have a dechlorinator at the time. And within a couple hours, like 5 out of the 7 adult guppies in the tank were dead. And I was pretty freaked out. I've never really had fish respond that poorly to a water change at any time. And I'd done water changes without dechlorinator plenty of times before. It might have been that there was more chlorine in the water that day, or it was too cold and the guppies were just really sensitive. But really the theme of that was always dechlorinate your water. Always make sure it's as close to the same conditions as the aquarium that you're putting the water into, because you never know what day your tap water may be a little different than usual, or what fish may be a little less capable of tolerating a shift in water parameters. Yeah, so just always, water changes are important, but it's important that you do them in a focused manner, because if you're careless with it, you could end up killing your fish when you're trying to just do routine maintenance. Now, probably the most irritating failure that I've dealt with keeping fish has been internal parasites. Now, internal parasites are a really difficult failure to avoid because it can be almost impossible to detect their presence until, I guess, it's too late, or you come to a point where the fish are so infected that they're not eating, and then you're like, what's wrong with my fish? And then all of a sudden it's getting so skinny that it dies. So the first time I dealt with this was with Camellinus redworm, which is a particular type of parasite. You can look it up online. The little worms that sort of stick out of the fish's anus. They're red and pointy. And I think I brought this in with some Bolivian rams that I got. This was when I was in high school. Because if you watch this channel enough, you know I love German blue rams. But I also knew that Bolivian rams are supposed to be a slightly easier version of German blue rams to keep, so I wanted to try them as well. I searched all over for them, and I finally found a store that had them. They're not usually that hard to come by, but for some reason in my area they were. So I got a few Bolivian rams from this store that was like an hour away from my house. I didn't really think that much about it. I bought them. I put them in their own tank, but then I wasn't very careful with preventing cross-contamination between tanks by using nets and like putting my hands in different tanks. And basically almost all my tanks ended up having Camellinus redworm infected in them. I had my German blue rams had it, the Bolivians had it. The Bolivians basically all died. And it was really just irritating because I wasn't 100% sure where the worms came from because I've been cross-contaminating so much. There was no way to like triangulate where it came from. But it seemed like, considering the Bolivians all died, it was probably something to do with them. But what I learned from this was the medication you use to treat Camellinus redworm is called levamisole. So I acquired some levamisole and started using it to treat, and I was able to save some of my fish. And then I also obviously learned that cross-contamination is a really stupid thing to allow to go on that can lead to a lot of fish dying that didn't need to die. So I think it's really important that you don't necessarily need like a designated net for each tank or anything like that, but you do need to make sure that if you're going to use the same net for multiple tanks, you allow it to dry out between uses to make sure that you're not exchanging anything between tanks. And really just make sure, if you're putting your hands in a tank, don't put your hands in multiple tanks in one like maintenance session for your aquariums. Kind of do them one at a time so you make sure that you keep the different tanks isolated from each other in certain terms of pathogens and other parasites and things that could be in the water. I'm dealing with this now with my angelfish because for whatever reason, they seem to have come in with parasites. They didn't show up for a few months, but now I have one angelfish that won't eat. I've been treating them with Paracleanse, which is a more general deworming medication, because I don't see Camellinus redworm sticking out of their anus. So it's probably just some other more general parasite. But parasites really suck because now I just have to be super worried about making sure anything in the infected tank doesn't touch anything in any of the other tanks. So internal parasites are something you really got to watch out for, especially if you have multiple tanks, because it can ruin your life and really make you make fish keeping a lot less enjoyable very quickly if you're not careful. So those were the main challenges that I felt like I've faced. I'm just going to go over a couple other common ones that I'm guilty of, and I feel like a lot of people, both beginners and advanced fish keepers, are guilty of. One of them is not water testing frequently. A lot of times I start to feel like I sort of am in tune with my tank, and I know what's going on. I watch the fish, and I can tell the water's at a good place without testing it. Now, to some extent that may be true, but a lot of times water parameters get out of whack gradually, and your tank can go from looking totally fine to there being a big problem in a matter of just like a day. This can happen with like pH crashes. So it's really important that you test your water. I would say I probably test it like once a month, but once a week is probably just better, especially if you can get like a test kit with drops. It's a lot more affordable in the long term than getting test strips, and it's also more accurate. And I feel like it's also just a good box to check to know that you're keeping an eye on your tank and are making sure that it's in good health. And then generally, I'd just say changing too many things at once is a big mistake that a lot of people make. Anytime, whether that's adding multiple different types of fish at the same time, whether it's adding a new decoration, adding a new light, changing the heater, changing the temperature. There are a lot of different things that you can change in your tank to its benefit or to harm it, but it's always better to move one change at a time, because sort of related to how scientific experiments are conducted, if you change one thing at a time, you can attribute a result more accurately to a specific change you made. If you make 10 changes all at once, any results that occur, you'll have no idea what change you made actually triggered the result. So I think it's really important that failures are going to happen, but if you're able to slow down a little bit, do things like test your water, make changes gradually rather than all at once, you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls and make a lot more of the shots you take than miss. But overall, I'd say the main message I want to send is don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're going to happen. Just make sure you learn from them, and that'll just lead to a more enjoyable and successful hobby.